Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our meetings. We're super excited to be here with you. Thank you so much for taking the time. Good morning, good afternoon. I don't know exactly what time do you have, but yes, we are super excited to be with you, to learn from you, to share with you some of our best practices. And Rocio and Sakia, would you like to say hi to the team?
Sure. Hello from California. Good morning and good afternoon, if that's where you are. Happy to be here and looking forward to our learning session today.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rocio Molina, the Deputy Director at NUAP, and I wanted to say hello. I'm happy that we are getting started with this year's Community of Practices. It's been a busy year. January was a year all by itself with all the deadlines and everything, but we're ready to, get going and have more meetings this year. And we have some dates for you to save for the next one. So let me go ahead and start sharing the screen and we'll get started. And so today we're going to talk about, we had already Leslie meet us. Well, going back, right? Our first session on U Visa, we had Leslie talk to us about congressional intent and why the U Visa was developed. And then the last meeting, we had Officer Michael Lerivier talk about how the U Visa helps law enforcement. And that's a really good foundation because of that one piece of evidence that the U Visa case needs, and that's the law enforcement certification. And we said hello. And then, thank you to OVW for this time, this funding, and this space. And then this is a disclaimer, just letting you know these slides are intended to lead our discussion and then to be a guide for you later. And I'll email them all to you guys as well as all the links that we share in the chats and any other resources we share with each other. So feel free as you hear us talk about stuff to share resources, and I'll make sure that all of us get it.
So let's start. If you can use the chat and share with us your city and state. If you don't know where your chat is, here is an arrow. Thank you so much. So from Santa Clara, California, Oxford, Queens, El Paso, everywhere. That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, everybody say hello. And now for something a little fun before we get big into a more serious subject.
Yes, and we want to know, spring started yesterday, actually. Yes. But it seems that in some cities, it's still snowing and freezing. However, we want to learn a little bit more about what do you observe or celebrate if you celebrate something special during spring holiday. If so, if you can share, that would be awesome. Spring planting. Thank you, Libby. Holy Festival of Colors. That's wonderful. What else do you celebrate? Bengali New Year. Thank you, Sakya. I imagine that that's a huge celebration. Maharashtrian New Year. And I hope I pronounce it well. Festival of Spring.
Oh, okay. I'm going to be so boring, or maybe not, but you know what I'm putting? Easter over here with the little ones.
What else do you celebrate during spring?
Any Irish folk that just did St. Patty's?
Patrick.
St. Patrick's.
Ramadan. Yeah.
Yeah. The Festival of Light. That's great. So we all have something, to celebrate or observe as we come along to this new season. Here are some things. Oh, Nora, your mom's birthday. Yeah, that's a big one, I think. here are some dates for you to save. We already know when we're going to have the next community of practice. And I know, save this date. It's going to be April 19th from 1 to 2:30 Eastern. And I also wanted to give you guys an inside scoop on NUAP is having an in-person conference, the first time that we have had one since 2016. It's going to be in the Boston area for 2 days, and it's going to be the last week in August. And so there's going to be two days. So it's either going to be you can either come to the one on the 28th and the 29th, or you come to the one on the 30th and 31st. It's going to be OVW funded, and OVW, you can use your OVW funds to attend. There's no cost to attend. You just have to get there on your own travel money and hotel and everything. And so, I wanted you guys to be one of the first to know, so that you can keep an eye out for those invitations and register, because usually they fill up pretty quick. And I'd love for the community of practice to take over and get to see you guys in person. So this kind of save those dates. And as soon as I can have that flyer ready to release and approved, I'm going to share it with you guys first thing. All right. So
Hey,
here. Yes.
I just had a quick question about it. Will the 2 sessions be different? Are they going to be the same? It's just based on your schedule.
Exactly. It's the same thing. It's like a circus show. The first showing is the 28th, the 29th, and then the same program, 30, 31st. I hope you can go.
Sounds so exciting.
Okay, guys, so let's get started on this U Visa thing. And then I wanted to start with something serious, because some of you guys did make some comments before, reached out to me separately about how we used a lot the term victim in the last couple sessions. And I understand that a lot of survivors identify as survivors, crime victim survivors. And for the U Visa, it is one of the requirements. Remember, one of the requirements is to be a victim of qualifying crime activity. And so here with the U Visa, the term victim is used with the U Visa because of the legal rights that it presents. Then I wanted to be clear: men, women, children, same-sex couples, LGBTQI people, anyone is eligible for the U Visa. The perpetrator can be anyone, and the victim, survivor, crime victim survivor, can be anyone. So it doesn't matter who they are or how they came to the country. And then I also wanted to recognize that a lot of survivors choose not to go through the criminal justice system. That's a decision based on culture. It could be a decision based on their previous experience with the justice system. And so we recognize those survivors. But for the U Visa, there has to be that interaction with somebody in the justice system or somebody that can do investigation. And so those survivors that choose not to come forward and seek justice through the criminal justice system will be almost likely 100% left out of the U Visa because of that requirement. And then if you weren't able to make any of the other sessions on U Visa, the one that we had with Leslie or the one that we have with Mike, email me and I can send you the recordings. We have them. But just, I'm going to give you guys just a tiny recap. And of who's here, let me do a lift of hands. How many of you, because as we were preparing these slides, Zakia, Norma, and we talked about how much to really get in there with the mechanics of the U Visa, how much maybe you just want to know like an overview, broad understanding of what the U Visa is. But how many of you guys are able to assist? Okay, well, let's start more broadly. How many of you are able to screen survivors to see if they're eligible for U Visa? And then raise your hand. And I'm not sure how many hands we can have, but if you guys can help me see. Okay, so almost all of us are allowed to screen, and I think that's, I don't see why we wouldn't be allowed to screen, right? Because that's part of us doing safety planning, is screening, and if we're not actually allowed to help in the actual application preparation, we can definitely help in identifying and identifying somebody that needs that remedy, and that's great, because it should be part of your safety planning. And how many of you are able to actually assist with the filing? Oh, let me ask you to put your hands down so that our data is more accurate. Okay, how many of you are able to do more than just screen, but maybe help with collecting evidence, or maybe even as far as putting applications together? So a good number of you are, and others are just referring. Okay. And so, yeah, we have a lot of work to do, a lot of our things that we do in safety planning, and some of us might just refer, but screening and identifying, I think, is key. All right, so let's go into it a little. So the U Visa fills a unique gap for crime victims. We talked about the VAWA self-petition, and I think this graphic here, I'm trying to show you that when we're talking about the VAWA self-petition, the person needed to have that qualifying familiar relationship with the abuser. And so with U Visa, there doesn't have to be a qualifying relationship. There doesn't matter who the abuser is. The abuser could be a stranger. In VAWA self-petition, the abuser had to be a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, right? It could have been a spouse, it could be a parent, it could be their child. But here with U Visa, doesn't matter what immigration status that person, the perpetrator, has. In VAWA, the couple, let's say in a domestic violence case, or spouse, husband, or family, they had to have lived together at some point. And here in U Visa, that requirement does not exist. And so the U Visa fills that gap. And then I'm going to share with you the link to this infographic. You've seen it a million times, but it's that shield. It has all the different protections that are offered from the Department of Homeland Security for immigrant crime victims, and really great tool because it tells you what are the qualifications for each and what survivors get if they're approved. And so the ones that we're not going to talk about today are continued presence. That one is given to victims of trafficking, and it has to be requested by a federal agency or federal prosecutor. As special immigrant juvenile status, that is for minors that have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or more parent, but the requirement is just one parent. And then asylum for victims of persecution. They could be persecuted based on account of race, religion, nationality. In our work, we might see it because of gender-based violence in their home country. And then T Visa, we're going to save for another community of practice meeting down the road. We've already talked about VAWA, and today we're talking about the U Visa.
Hey, Rocio, before we move on, if I may also, it would be beneficial for us to also find out how many here are DOJ accredited representatives that can actually represent and prepare U Visa applications. Do we want to do that?
Yes, perfect. I had another person ask me that same question. So how many of you are accredited on your agency to prepare applications? Raise your hand.
It looks only one. What about seeking accreditation? If you are looking to be prepared to be accredited, can you raise your hands? Okay. Good. Thank you.
And then how about who's interested in learning about getting themselves accredited or getting their agency accredited? So some of us are interested. Oh, and I see a real hand there, Sonia. I was looking for the graphic. Thank you. And so, yeah, that was right along the path of what Zakia and Norma and I were talking about. And we want to bring somebody here from a clinic to tell us about what you can do. And Norma and Zakia, I have a little experience on seeking accreditation and what that involves. So we're going to do a session on that upcoming in the summer. Okay, so a quick recap of the U Visa requirements is victim of qualifying criminal activity, possess information about the crime had to occur in the US, and then the last one that they look at is that the person is admissible, or they look to see the criminal history and immigration history, and they grant a pardon based on it being on the public interest. Another criteria is if they're helpful. So that's have they been, is it likely to be helpful in the detection, investigation, prosecution, conviction, or sentencing? And then requirement again here is that the victim suffered physical or mental harm as a result of that crime. And if this is meant to be interactive, we have certain things that we thought we'd cover, but feel free and ask questions as we go along, and they could be in the chat, or they can just be, unmute yourself and go ahead. Or these are the criminal crimes, that the qualifying criminal activities. They're criminal activities because they're named different in every state. The ones we see a lot in our work are the domestic violence, sexual assault, stalking, felonious assault. Sometimes you see more than one in one case, and in that case that there could be more than one criminal activity happen. The crime doesn't have to go all the way through. It could be an attempt or conspiracy or solicitation to commit the crime. And these again are general categories. And so when we're asking for the U Visa certification, according to the Department of Homeland Security resources, USCIS only looks at three things. They look to see if the applicant was a victim of one of those qualifying criminal activities. Did the victim, crime survivor, possess credible, reliable information about the criminal activity? And was the victim was likely to be helpful in the detection, investigation, prosecution, or sentencing? And then here it is for those that are more visual, right? They look at the applicant. Have they been, is it likely to be, or are they likely to be helpful? And then in those 5 areas. And then it's the certifying agency that determines whether they're helpful. There is no degree of helpfulness required or timing of when that happens. DHS looks at the whole circumstances. Any agency may complete the U Visa certification as soon as they assess that that person is helpful or will be helpful. If a victim has a criminal history, it doesn't prevent them to seek U Visa eligibility. And sometimes, particularly when a crime is connected to the abuse or the victimization. For example, if somebody has a history of prostitution and they are a victim of human trafficking, that it will not impact their ability to have that U Visa approved. And the investigation or prosecution could still be ongoing, and the certifier can revoke the U Visa certification at their discretion. And then we had Officer Michael Olivier tell us about the benefits to law enforcement and prosecutors to work with survivors, to build that trust, to encourage them to report the crime. And then I just wanted to recap the big points, the takeaways, right? It improves investigation and prosecution. It helps get the bad guys off the streets. Sometimes the most dangerous criminals are the ones that are perpetrating the domestic violence and the sexual assault. Then later, when we see somebody is, a violent criminal, they have that history of domestic violence or sexual assault. It demonstrates that police are protecting everyone, and most mission statements of police departments will have, serve and protect all, or some version of that. And so that just fits with their commitment that they're making to the community. And it just works on that community policing partnership. And then it keeps officers safe.
And also, I would like to say, if you have the opportunity to do these roll calls with your law enforcement, that would be awesome if you can share all these also with them, so because of course they know that their primary focus is community safety, but then if you share with them how community safety means everybody, including immigrant, undocumented, and how, this collaboration from the victim, knowing that probably they might qualify for a relief, an immigration relief. I mean, that builds more trust with them, and also let them know, that they are not, and we're going to be talking about that later, but I just want to bring it when you're doing this roll calls or training your law enforcement, just let them know that they're not giving citizenship. I mean, it's not like that. It's more like just helpfulness, and said that, yes, there was a crime committed, and yes, this victim was a victim of this certain crime. I think it really helps when you as advocates create that connection with law enforcement. And again, I guess that some of you participate as legal advocates doing protective orders, and also doing roll calls on any type of training to law enforcement. So keep in mind that you can use also these slides and this information when you are training them.
And so I wanted to point out, how many of you live in a state that has a U Visa certification state law? We've been talking about what the federal requirements are and what DHS recommends, but raise your hand if your state has a U Visa certification state law. And if you don't know, if you do, why don't you put it there on the chat? And if you don't know, also put that there in the chat. And so Zoraida State does. She lives in Washington. Susana Barrios, Georgia? Or what state? I'm not sure. Wisconsin does. Yeah, Missouri does not, correct. Nostrat is in Texas. You're right, we do not. Lourdes, not sure what state you're in. Don't know if we have one in North Carolina. Okay. Florida. Okay, yeah, Florida does not. So these are the ones that yeah, I can tell you definitely more what this is. These are the ones that NUAP has identified, states that do have UMT visa certification. Sometimes we learn about it, because we get notices of it, or coalitions share it with us. Sometimes we do research. We keep up a list of them in our library. And so I'll share that link with you guys. But these are the states that I am aware of. And, even in putting this together, I came across Virginia's state law. And so I updated our library with that. And that law passed in 2021. And so some state law, some states have laws that give kind of a policy or guidance to how law enforcement should be handling certifications. And so our NUAP library has the list of these states, and it tells you more about and gives you that specific law. I wanted to share with you the one in California because I thought that theirs was really good. The one in California first requires that state and local law enforcement share with the survivor and their advocate the police report within 7 days. as to helpfulness, I thought they did a great job on it. They also say that certifiers are required to certify their helpfulness when a survivor asks for the certification and they're a victim of the qualifying crime and they've been helpful, likely to be helpful or have been helpful. So, but pretty much exactly what Department of Homeland Security is looking for. But if you notice, it's very clear that law enforcement is not going to assess whether harm was done to the victim. And that's actually not one of the requirements for certification. So it narrows that down to what exactly are the requirements. The other good thing about this statute is that there's a rebuttable presumption that the survivor meets the helpfulness requirement, even if there's no evidence that the survivor refused or failed to provide information when reasonably requested by law enforcement. So that rebuttable presumption is helpful. That means to me, if they open up the file and there's nothing in there that says that they were not helpful, then they're going to make a finding that the person was helpful. And then they must fully complete and sign the certification and add as much details as they can. It also has a timeline for them. They have to process the request within 30 days. Some of the states have 90, some of them have 60. And so you want to look to see what, if your state is one of the ones that I listed, see what it is. And then it has sometimes a component if somebody's in removal proceedings where you can't wait the 30 days or the 7 days, or the 90 days, it lowers it to 70 days. It clarifies very nicely that even if no charges were filed or no prosecution or no conviction was resulted and the investigation is over or the case is closed, they could still ask for certification. They can't refuse to sign because it's already been prosecuted or closed, or because the time for commencing the criminal action has expired. So maybe reporting on a sexual assault where the statute of limitation has already passed, they'll still should certify based on the state law. And they can only withdraw the certification if the survivor refuses to provide information and assistance when reasonably requested. So with Nurse Rat question that's earlier when you said, I think this is a little on point, so I'll grab the question now, but it said, what if in a criminal case is withdrawn by the survivor? So the survivor, I guess, doesn't want to press charges or recants. Can the survivor get U Visa certification later? What do you guys think based on California law here? And feel free to unmute.
And I'm not sure if Celia Guardado, if you would like to share something because you have your hand raised or no.
So I think I can share an example here that we had a situation. Actually, this is very common in many of our survivors that they don't want to get involved in the law enforcement. Anything to do with the law enforcement, the first instinct is not getting involved. Now, we had a situation when the abuser was arrested, and the police reached out for investigation purposes, but our client, she did not want to get involved in that. And there were pressure from the abuser and family members to kind of, settle this out, try to compromise. Things are going to get better if this goes away. So she decided not to cooperate. Once the bail was given to the other party, he just fled the country, completely abandoned the client with her children and all. Then the client realized, who did not have a visa to stay here, she was on a tourist visa actually. She realized that helping the law enforcement could actually save her, offer her protection for herself and her family. So we tried to get the certification, and one time they refused to give it, and they said whatever this code says, right? That helpfulness, she was not helpful. She refused to talk to the police, didn't want to, the police officers take her pictures properly and all of that. And then we went back another time with a letter explaining why in domestic violence situations, victims and survivors may not want to get involved. What are some of the barriers that, especially for immigrants, that come in the front when they're trying to get involved with the law enforcement, the distrust, the fear of getting involved. And of course, there are cultural elements too, depending on which culture this survivor belongs to, and how that conditioning, how her experience actually deter her from getting involved in the in law enforcement punishment focused remedies. So we tried to explain it, and we were successful the second time to get certification for this person. So it would really depend on your advocacy and of course, where you are asking for certification. And that brings out another point, that why you need to create multiple options for certifications. I think that's what we will be getting into now, how judges can also certify. So there is a police when somebody is getting involved in one of these qualifying crime. Then there is a district attorney who may or may not prosecute, and the helpfulness is there. And then there is, of course, the criminal court or civil court providing a protection order. So all of these places, all of these are actually potential certifiers that we will be talking about next.
And I think Dr. Nusrat would like to share.
So yes, I echo with what Zakia just said, but the question that I posed is opposite to what she said, is where our client survivor was coerced in going back to home country by saying that my attorney friend is working on your payroll, so you'll be okay. And she basically had a protective order for 2 months. And once she gave birth to the baby, and she was the person who's a citizen was charged with a felony charge because he had physically abused her during the pregnancy. So he somehow coerced her, manipulated her, and we all know all this, the tactics that the abusers play for her to withdraw the case. So she withdrew the case, she had the baby, and once she had the baby and the baby was able to travel, he just, by coercion took her back and, canceled her, application, and her interview was actually scheduled for March 28th, like 2 days before, but she was already taken. So my question was, we are trying to see whether we can help her to get a visa to come back here, because we cannot do anything while she is out of the country. And then we can, help her with, things. In this case, she's better because we can help her under the VAWA, but most of our cases, as Zakia has said, that if they are on an H4, we need the requirement for the U visa, if this type of things happen and they withdraw, whether they will be able to get the U certification. And because Texas does not have any state law or any, protocol that complies to, that all the agencies are bound to comply with, we see different scenarios here. Some of the law enforcement certify, some of them don't. So that is where we are stuck. Like, we need to have a unified, process where if the survivors qualify and have been helpful, but because of the power and control has lost it at one point, and because they were played by the abuser, whether the person can still get the U certification. That was my question.
Yeah, so when you are resending your request, that's when you do the advocacy, right? You explain why this person was doing it, and whether for domestic violence victims and survivors, these are certain things we see that they can recant, they can go back in the relationship, or hopes for some kind of compromise and all of that. So once you bring in those advocacy points and try to get recertified, that will explain the helpfulness and why this person was not helpful at the first time.
At that point, and in many states, you know, even if the victim recants, prosecutors and law enforcement can go move forward with arrest or move forward with prosecutions. That's a good point. And about the culture, teaching others about it, you know, even I learned, I think earlier this month, Zakia had a TA question for us at NUAP, and it was about a battered spouse waiver client that wanted to remarry while it was pending. And we did the research for her. We looked for her for 10 minutes, 15 minutes. I have reached out to other experts to look, and to me, I'm like, well, just wait, don't get married. And I'm talking about it as a 40-year-old woman that's never been married. So I'm like, just wait, don't get married. And then we did the research, and when I talked to Zakia, she explained to me, you know, you told me that in her culture, she's already living with this guy, he's helping her, and it looks very bad that she's not married, and it's very important to her to get married. And then I understood. But at first I went like, okay, yeah, I already looked for 10 minutes, I didn't find the answer, just don't get married. But, you know, once you understand, somebody explains it to you, you'll understand a little more. But remember, the requirement is when reasonably requested. Sometimes as advocates, it's our role to maybe help them communicate with law enforcement that they have those threats, and that's why they're recanting, or reasons why there's that recantation. And we know that that's part of the dynamics that you see, and USCIS understands that. To get back on the policies and how important they are, I found again that clinic, the Catholic organization, they have a toolkit on how to get your legislature and those empowered to have a state law. So those of you that are in Texas and Georgia, I think we said Missouri didn't have one either. This toolkit tells you what are some of the approaches that other states have done to get these laws. A checklist of what a good bill should have. You know, I gave you an example of a really good one because I want us to reach for as many things as we can. But, you know, often the people in the coalitions or in the networks ask us, what are our asks for this year? What are your dream asks? What would you like to change? What could make the U Visa more accessible to everyone? And one of them is having that state law that gives some kind of procedure, a timeline. I think it's great for that. If they just have it, they have to respond, and that they have to follow what Department of Homeland Security is requiring of them, then that's already a win there. And then it has also a sample language for a U Visa certification bill. And then it also has a PowerPoint training for certifiers around U Visa certification. I didn't see that one. But I know that all their resources are great.
And I think there was someone from the DA's victim advocate who raised her hand.
Yeah, that would be a good point of view. I want that other question on the recantation. I'd love to hear.
Hey, Norma, and oh, hang on, let me switch this over. NOCL. Yeah, just as a certifier, I know we already passed that point, but I did want to just give like an observation from my point of view as a certifier. And so we understand the dynamics of domestic violence, and we understand the wheel of power and control and how victims, and I will say victim just because legally that's the proper way. And I understand, you know, people identify differently, but for purposes of this training, I'll just say victim. They recant and then they come forward, and they recant and come forward. It's a cycle. And so we understand that dynamic. It becomes difficult when you have actual documentation, like an affidavit that's been written that says, I would like for charges to be dropped. I no longer wish to continue this case. Those are the instances that it becomes difficult. So there are a couple options that we can do as a certifier. One would be without the certification, you can't file. Like you need that supplement B no matter what. So you can certify something saying, the victim is qualifying criminal activity. They're cooperative at the beginning. However, they did wish for charges to be dropped. And then the attorney or whoever's handling the case can argue their point, whether it be with like a letter or information regarding to DV. And also what I have noticed working with victims here is that we would have in the state of Georgia, it's the state versus the defendant. It's not the victim versus the defendant or the petitioner versus the respondent when it comes to criminal cases. And so we'll have, I want these charges dropped. But once we can get through the victim and explain that it's the state versus the abuser, not them versus the abuser, sometimes they'll be more cooperative and say, well, I don't agree with it, but I will let the court decide. So in a way, they're being cooperative, and which, victims are entitled to feel however they want to. So I don't know. So it gets kind of difficult in those situations when it comes to like recanting. So I don't know. This is like kind of like my 2 cents when it comes to certifying things that are in writing, or when parents, they block our number, they completely refuse to speak with us, or after there's a case and it's active and we certify, they continue to be in contact with the defendant, they continue like their relationship, then those instances are not justifiable for certification. Yeah.
And thank you for sharing. And I just would like to add something regarding dropping the charges, because, working from the other side, I can see all the family members from the country of origin of the defendant pushing the victim, and the family of the victim and the children and so on, saying you just have to drop the charges, without even understanding that the legal system in the state is totally different from their country of origin. So sometimes, and I just want to share that because I've seen it so often, when sometimes the victims just said, yes, I'm going to send this letter to the DA or solicitors because my family from my country of origin said that this is the way that has to be, without even having the knowledge, of the law. So I understand that part. I mean, it's tough because you have to be in the middle, understanding that the family is pushing her, and in the other side, your role, of taking like, okay, she's asking me to take off the charges. And also there's a lot of threats, and I've seen this with a lot of Hispanics, where the family is saying, hey, drop the charges because we're living in El Salvador and the Mara, and the gangs over here are threatening us that if you don't drop the charges, something will happen to us, things like that. But yeah, it's tough. Sakia, would you like to share?
Yeah, so thank you, Norma, for bringing that out. I will also want to mention 2 other situations when it may look like that the victim is not being helpful. So many people continue to stay with the other party, right? Both parties, they're staying together even after arrest, even after the bail is happening, and even when the criminal charges are pending. And most situations, the mailing, it's under the control of the person who's going through this system, right? The abuser is controlling which mails are getting to the survivor or the victim. So they may not even know that they were asked by the investigator or they're being asked to appear for anything. We have seen these situations. That's one. Second, like in the example Dr. Nusrat Amin shared, many times the first instinct of a victim or a survivor when police gets involved in the DV situation is to pack up the bags and leave, right? Leave for home country where family is there for emotional support. And once they have left, they're not in touch with the DA's office, or they probably don't even know what is going on. They will come back after a couple of months, and then by then it may be over, or by then whatever was going on continues to happen. And if this person goes back for certification, they also may seem that they were not helpful because you didn't respond to any of our queries. You didn't return our phone calls, right? So as advocates, I think each situation demands that we figure out what is it that in general, the domestic violence is putting the burden on this person, what dynamics are there, and also individually, what are the barriers for this person? What was this person handling that they could not be helpful? And one such, I think this is where our advocacy letters, even if from any cultural expert, even if from the therapist this person is seeing, could be actually helpful for getting started.
Let's look at an example on, this is an example from one of my cases where we were trying to figure out where we go for certification. And I'll read it in case there's any typos in this. Okay. Yvonne was giving her coworker Gilbert a ride home. They often carpooled. They worked together in the fields. During the ride home, he expressed he wanted to date her and be romantically involved. Yvonne said she already had a partner and she was not interested. Gilbert became more than persistent at work and via text. He said if he couldn't have her, nobody would. He would show up uninvited to her house and church. She would even see him drive by her house. Via text, he threatened to shoot her and then shoot himself. Yvonne reported all this to the police, and the police made a 2-page report. The police didn't arrest him, and she got the feeling that there wasn't much more help that the police would offer her. The officer suggested she should seek a civil protection order. With the help of a victim advocate, Yvonne did not understand English well. She was undocumented. She applied for the protection order. In the pleadings, she explained the threats to shoot her and all the times that she felt unsafe because he was stalking her or showing up unexpected, and also provided proof of the threatening calls and texts that she had received. The day of the protection order hearing, Yvonne gave the testimony and it pretty much matched what the pleading said. And the judge made a finding that Gilbert had harassed and threatened her and stalked Yvonne, and he granted the protection order. So then let's look at this. Let's start with, what are, and I don't want to go back on the slides, but remember the 3 things for that certifier will be looking for is, were they a victim of a qualifying criminal activity? So here, either on chat or verbal, what is the qualifying criminal activities that you all see? Okay. Where would you think the threats, the stalking and the threats? There you go. I see 2 there. Threats to shoot, right? He didn't shoot, but there's the threat. And then there's the stalking. And so if I were to go back to the slides, we'll see that their stalking is 1, and we'll see that, I'm not sure threats to shoot is 1. Yeah. And so those are the 2 that we see. And so you're going to think, where was she the most helpful? Who would I be looking for as a certifier, right? So first thing, usually I'll ask the client, did you call the police? And then they'll say, yes, I called the police. Which one? Was it the sheriff? Was it the police? Which station? Which, we wait 2 weeks to get that police report. We get it. It's 2 pages and there's really nothing. Yeah, it says investigated. Maybe it had her name as a victim. And it's pretty much says the same thing, that they carpooled, they worked together, that she was fearful, that he said that he was going to shoot her, but nothing more on that 2-page. There were no follow-up, no arrest, nothing. Well, you guys have seen how in the list of helpfulness we have already there, she was helpful in the detection of this criminal activity, right? They chose to investigate further, she was helpful in the investigation of this criminal activity. But after looking at the report, I'm getting nervous about getting this certification, especially if I live in a state that doesn't require a response. So what other options do you guys see here? So there's, she went and got that civil protection order, right? And for a lot of times, I think the field was divided, like, can you get a certification of qualifying criminal activity from a civil protection order? There's nothing in there that says civil protection order granting. And so here, the judge, she did more, right? She wrote her story there in the pleadings. She testified. She talked about the criminal activities that happened. The judge found her credible, right? So he found that she was a victim of these qualifying criminal activities. And he or she made a finding that there was harassment, there was threats, and that she was stalked. So I see a finding there, even of those qualifying criminal activities. So I think that would be worthy of exploring. And that probably would be the first avenue that I would go if I didn't already have a good relationship with the police department there. Or if I didn't have a state law that would merit for them to respond. Any other thoughts on this? In this case, can the judge sign the certification? Yes. So for that reason, Congress, and Leslie talked about this, but there's multiple lists of who can certify. I'll let Norma tell us who's on the list.
Yeah, and thank you. And yes, thank you for that question, because most of the time we're thinking about police and that's it. But no, guess what? There's like a lot of people who might be able to certify, and that's where your advocacy mind has to figure it out. I mean, who you're going to be touching base, asking for the certification. So yes, police, sheriff, FBI, prosecutors. I mean, we already heard our victim advocate from the DAs. Thank you so much. And yes, of course, prosecutors, head of agency or designate. Of course, some agencies, they have the head who's going to be the one who's going to be certifying. Judges, magistrate, commissioners, any other judicial officer can certify. Of course, the Department of Labor, and in some different cases, I mean, definitely we want to touch base with them, or with EOC, Equal Opportunity Commission, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, child and elder abuse agencies. Think about them also. I mean, it's not that easy sometimes, but keep in mind that in your case, you can think, okay, who was involved in all these situations, in all this crime? Police, judges, we did a protective order, but also the Department of Child Protective or Child Families Protection. I don't know what's the name on each state, but well, child and elder abuse agencies and other government agencies with investigative authority. So you have like multiple agencies that might be helpful. You don't have just to get stuck with police when probably you are just starting creating this friendly relationship with them. I mean, think about everybody at the same time. So there is no statute of limitation on signing a certification. That's very important to remember. However, keep in mind that as soon as you get the certification, there's going to be 6 months and it will expire. So I would suggest for you, if you're assisting somebody, just to gather everything, all the evidence and documents, and of course, touch base with the certification, because otherwise, if you start with the certification, you have 6 months to have everything together, and sometimes we know that for some people, it might be difficult to get their passport and children's passports and a lot of other documents that might be helpful. So Elvita, nice to see you. Do you have a question?
Hi, I just have a question, and maybe I'm confused because I'm confused with who is certified and with the certification. Because for sure, I live in Wisconsin, so I know that sometimes we get the process and sometimes the police sign the paper of the judges. But I thought for sure the Wisconsin has a certification, so I'm kind of confused that part.
Okay.
Do I make it clear that I thought that the state that has a certification was to be able to certify, and that's the part I don't get it.
I'm a little confused with your question. Okay, so are we talking about the U Visa certification?
Yeah.
Okay. And what do you mean by the state has the certification?
Okay, my question is, when you asked the question prior to the Rocio, you say, oh, did you know what states has certification?
Oh,
So I'm for sure that Wisconsin has certification because we have a lot of certified people. And then I saw the list that you have, and Wisconsin doesn't even appear to that. So my question is that two different processes?
no, so maybe you have, so, I mean, I want to hit escape and Google and look really quick and see if Wisconsin has one, and then I can add it to the list and update you. Sometimes there's county,
I look, and right now I'm looking in the information, the Norma chair, and I look and I don't see Wisconsin. But I know sometimes we have cases where I apply, I work for Disability Rights Wisconsin, and we have one attorney. So I get the paperwork from the police department. I take it to the DA, or the police sign the paperwork. So I thought for sure the Wisconsin has certification, and that's where I get very confused.
so every state could, everybody can sign certification. Everybody should be signing, and it's all under federal law with model policies on how they should do it and how they should follow, right? But it is under federal law, it's a discretion up to the certifier whether to sign or not sign. Then there's some organizations, some agencies, and maybe even like, for example, right now when our DA friend from Cobb County talked to us about certifying, or I know, and Zoraida, you have a state law, but some agencies, and a lot of them do, they have policies that say how they handle certifications. And a lot of them are good ones, and they follow the spirit of what Department of Homeland Security asks. And the policies are good too, because it gives some structure. But these state laws are laws that kind of give a structure and a timeline and it's passed through state legislature that encourages or has state law enforcement have a procedure, a policy for state law, for state law enforcement. Sometimes it includes prosecutors, and they should probably include all certifiers, but they're all different in every state. And the state law is just another tool to support somebody that asks for certification where there's no policies. And then of course you can't have a policy that's going to contradict state law, because if you have a policy and it goes against state law, then as a lawyer, I would be the first to say, hey, but the state law says you have to give me back in writing why you're not signing the certification. And so I'll do a little bit of research after, Elvita, to see if you guys have one. I know the advocates there at NW's Wisconsin, I used to work there, and they've always wanted to push for a state law on U Visa certification, and I'll see if you have one. But I think what might be happening here is that you guys have really good policy. I know Madison has really good policy. Dane County always has had a good policy. Some of the other counties around that area have policies, and they also follow a lot of the model policies to encourage and pass certification. But I don't know if you have a state law in the books for that.
Right, thanks. That will clarify for me. Thank you.
Yeah, and even you don't have Elvita, I mean, yes, all your authorities might be able to sign your certification. And here is like a huge list of other authorities that maybe you were not thinking of.
Yeah, and then I think ILRC immigrant, this other organization, they also have great resources. Evalise is sharing with me a resource. I haven't seen it, but I trust what they always have. I love their books, and this might have other states, but they're updated. Like I told you when I was looking to put together the list for you, and then last week I presented with Valor. That's when I did more research on the California one, and then I came across the Virginia one. And so if you don't have one, I wanted to show you guys the tool so that we can try to see how we can have one in your state.
And also, I mean, just a quick reminder, why would be important for you to have relationship and collaboration with all these authorities that we were mentioning, even the Department of Labor, you know, even EAOC, I mean, Department of Labor usually has, you know, wage and hour division. So if you get in contact because you want to help your clients to know about that, I mean, you create that contact information, that collaboration, that if in the future you would need them to certify, I mean, you can have that already, that collaboration already there, you know, that might be helpful. And if they have never certified somebody, because that could happen also, I think more often with child and elder abuse agencies, I mean, you can teach them, you know, and you have all the tools to say, hey, you know, you can do this, and this is the process, and then get that certification, no? And the other thing I would really want to share is that good relationship that you might have with all this authority would be helpful. I hope you don't have this case, but in some cases, the certification expire in 6 months and you didn't have like all the paperwork that you needed because the client got sick, because COVID, because, you know, and then you need to ask them again to sign because it was expired. So if you have that collaboration with them, that would be helpful. Otherwise, they might say, no, I already signed it, you know, I don't want to sign it again. I mean, it's not my problem that it was expired or something like that, you know? So I think building that collaboration is very helpful.
So, okay, so what, and we talked about asking for a judge in civil protection orders, and one of you guys mentioned in family orders. What other proceedings do you think you could ask a judge for a U Visa certification? So yeah, obviously, of course, in criminal court. I would say, you know, all the courts are different. Here's a list of no, this is the list is later, but all the courts are different, and we're in the starting point and how you get in. I want to talk to you, but first let's do this quick little ABCD. Why would you want to seek the U Visa certification from state court? Let's say right there in that example that I gave you with Yvonne and the stalking, you already have a good relationship with law enforcement, and he knows if you're gonna ask for a certification, it's coming from Norma. Norma's gonna give him a good a case of somebody that's eligible. And so you know, why would you want it there for a judge, with a judge instead? And so, you know, only justice system contact for that person was through a custody or protection order, a divorce, or civil employment or welfare case. Would you do it because maybe there was no language access to police when the victim called for help, like when Yvonne called and they only took a couple lines, maybe they didn't have language access for her? Or the judge observed a victim's attendance and the participation in a criminal case. So there, you know, why would you, in this case, it would be, you know, all of the above. And one thing that Leslie, our director, always says is, you know, judges might be the first point where it's mandatory and that a person has access to that language access in the court, and might be the first responder that gets and hears the whole full story. So that's why you would seek it through the state courts. Here are the example in the wide range of cases and civil protection. We gave that example in a custody case. So say the judge made a finding in a custody case that maybe child abuse occurred. A judge made a finding there that any of these crimes had occurred. Sometimes they make a finding that a sexual assault also occurred. Domestic violence occurs in custody and divorce cases, and judge makes findings on those. So those are opportunities for judges to also sign. In the juvenile cases with the abuse, neglect, you might even see it in a delinquency case. And so this is a list that we give judges when we train with them, that where they could be identifying and signing U Visa certifications. And, you know, of prosecutors, law enforcement, and the whole list of certifiers, judges are, you know, next to the other agencies like Department of Labor and EOC, judges are not the more, you know, there's not the one place you're going to go to first, right? You're going to look for the stronger place. But there, in that example that I gave you, when you're putting together that case, or when you're advocating for that victim and showing where they were helpful, the truth is Yvonne was way more helpful there with the court. I can show that she gave testimony. I can see that the pleading, that's where I'm going to show the most helpfulness. And so when you're analyzing it in a perfect world where you can get certification, and it was designed where you can seek it in through multiple certifiers, you're going to go to the place where you have the most helpfulness, because that just makes the most sense. And that just brings you the best and strongest case. And so here are the examples. Judges are starting to learn, probably in your community. I mean, I would love to see how many of you think in your community are judges certifying? Raise your hand. Okay, we got one.
Only one. Two.
Two. Okay. So I've sought judge certifications when I practice in Wisconsin, and then right now when I do some cases in California, we've gotten judge certification. It's tricky. I think you start with calling the clerk court, seeing if they have a policy, seeing if the state has a policy. California has a toolkit for judges on U Visa certification. We recently started doing a lot of training for judges on U Visa certification. That I think is something that we've really been working for in the last 5 years, is getting them to learn that how to identify survivors, how to sign. It gets tricky when it's in criminal law and there's a criminal case there, because a person can't go and just send a letter or certification to the judge. That would be an ex parte communication. And so in that case, the defendant would also know that they seek certification. In civil cases, the obligations are a little different. In criminal cases, it's different requirements, and judges will feel different about it, but we have a toolkit. I wanted to show you, well, anyone can sign the certification once they observe the helpfulness. It could be in a civil, family, or criminal case. And we've talked about it. The investigation or prosecution or family court case could be ongoing. It's good not to wait till the end, because the sooner that a person is in line, the more stable, the more support services they're able to access. The case can be closed. It could be settled. It could have happened a long time ago. It could also have been never prosecuted. And these are coming right from the curriculum that we teach the judges. We've seen this before. No convictions required. Charges don't have to be filed. Offender arrested, not necessary. Testimony, they didn't have to be a witness. It could be without the statute of limitation. Offender could be alive. I think that's where I was supposed to say could no longer be alive, or they could not be identified, because we're looking at a victim-centered approach when we're looking at that. What do you think some of the judges will tell you if you ask for certification? A judge staff, yep, the judge staff attorney or the clerk for the judge is also a good point. That's how when I've worked and asked for certification in other states, I go through the clerk of the judge. They'll know. I would say contact a TA provider like us, because we do the training and we have judges in our network. We know judges in a lot of states, and I have lists of them, and some of them might already know about certification and can talk to another judge about it. Looking in the website might also have the procedures that they have for requesting certification, but starting with their clerk or their staff attorney is a great a great suggestion. And here's the long list of judges that can include magistrates, referees. Judges may want to amend the form when we train them. We talk to them that they can scratch out. And it's the same thing with law enforcement or prosecutors. If maybe the example that we had earlier about the recanting, if you want to, if a certifier wants to amend the form or say more information on the form, well, they recanted. Yes, they were helpful at first. That could still puts the burden on the survivor to show that to USCIS that they're eligible. And then judges could look at pleadings, testimony, court attendance, who sought the orders, how they worked. They saw that the person maybe said in the testimony that they went to police or prosecutors, or if they spoke at conviction or sentencing. So that's the range of behaviors. How about this question? The judge that's signing the U Visa certification must be the judge that presided over the case that the victim is seeking certification. What do you guys think? True or false? Because, you know, the judges like to retire, right? Well, I guess we all like to retire, but I see it a lot that you look and the judge is either no longer in office or they've retired. Okay. So yeah, you guys figured that one out. It is false. It doesn't have to be the judge. So I've seen some policies that some courthouses have that say, the head judge or of that county, they sign all the certifications. And so it doesn't have to be that judge that presided, because judges do move around, they retire, they move, just like everyone else. And so it doesn't have to be that. I wanted to give you a little more examples in family or civil cases. So appearing at the full protection order hearing. That I think that'll get tricky, when people go for protection orders and they agree to have no findings in the protection order. So you want to make sure there is the finding of that harassment or that stalking. Make sure that there is that finding to make that an enforceable protection order, or for us to be able to show that crime was detected. Pleading or testifying about abuse, sexual assault. In housing cases, you might see that, or employment cases. Evidence that a victim called police or cooperated in a criminal or EEOC investigation. And then serving a perpetrator with notice of the protection order. Or looking at pleadings that have allegations of any of the criminal activities. Then some of the examples of helpfulness we've seen could be calling 911, participating in a criminal investigation, identifying a perpetrator in a lineup, testifying before a grand jury, making an appearance, a victim impact statement, testimony at sentencing. And there's a whole checklist that has a whole bunch of other things that could be considered helpfulness. This is what we recommend for judges when they want to amend it. So let's say you're making a request to a judge and you write the letter. And I looked at one before when I was putting together the slides. It said, as a judge, you play an important role. They identified you as a certifier. Maybe it's the first time they hear that they can certify. So I'm going to show them how in the toolkit from Department of Homeland Security says judges can be certifiers, right? Let them know, you detected this crime of stalking. You made a finding and granted the protection order for this client, for this survivor, because of the testimony that they gave, and they identified the criminal activity. And then I would even let them know there's a toolkit from New App, and I'm going to share the link. But if they want to know more about it, here's the link of how you can learn more about U Visa certification. And you can let them know if you feel comfortable about ethically, the judges, they have the ethics, different ethics that attorneys do. You can scratch out what you need to. So they could say there instead of their investigation, because this is what the form says, right? It says based upon investigation of facts, right? So judges don't investigate. But they can say, based on my findings, based on my rulings, they could say based on the probable cause, based on the issuance of my protection order, based on the sentencing of the defendant, or I have presided over this criminal case. And so this is some of the suggested language that judges have shared with us that they have done to amend this, so where they're more comfortable signing this to where it's more fitting of their role as a judge. And so is the, a reminder that you just believe the applicant was a victim of a crime, and that Department of Homeland Security is the one that decides this immigration relief or this benefit. That's always very important to some certifiers, is that they're not the one that's granting the immigration relief. They're not the ones that are saying you can or cannot have the U visa. It's Department of Homeland Security who ultimately makes that decision. And then these are the resources. So the U Visa certification toolkit for judges, and it has bench cards and it has reference guides, and it can show you how to talk to judges about it. I would be happy to work with you on a letter or help you figure out how that court does certification, or look to see if we have any connections with judges in that county. So, keep that as an option open. Seek opportunities to train them. I know one of you on this call has reached out to me before about getting their judges trained in their county, and we're hoping to go out there and train the judges. The requirement there is that the judge asks for the training. It's very similar to our training that we do with law enforcement. We have grants to train your law enforcement and your judges. The only thing is you need to get a partner within those agencies to ask us or partner with you in requesting that training. And then I'm going to share with you in the follow-up email a flyer for judges to learn more about U Visa certification. And then there's this National Judicial Network that Leslie runs with other judges around the country. And they explore a lot of issues working with immigrants, survivors, and human trafficking, and working with survivors in a trauma-informed way. Very interesting speakers that they have. It's just for judges. And, it could be just a resource for you to share with the bench in your jurisdiction. I wanted to also, how many of you have requested certification from child or adult protection agencies? Zakia? No? Norma? You, yes. How about anyone else? Thank you for sharing those materials, Norma. Not yet. Okay. I have, and maybe Norma, you want to share when you have circumstances.
I mean, actually, our case was with child protection services, but it was tricky, because we started with law enforcement and they didn't want to sign the certification. And then we went to solicitors, and at that time, or DAs, actually was DAs. And at that time, I mean, they were starting to just sign some, no sign no. So it was tricky, and they didn't reply at all. And that's when we said, let's try, in Georgia, it's called DFACS. So we had a good relationship with them. However, we didn't talk about U visas and it took us a while, it took us a lot of questions from the head of this office, which is totally okay. And at the end, she signed the certification, and yeah, but it was just one time, because other times, I mean, we have been doing with law enforcement, DAs, or solicitors.
Yeah. I've had a similar experience where we did the Child Protection Agency had a great or the investigators or representative worker, caseworker, and she really understood U Visa and the dynamics in her role, and she would sign certifications. And so whenever there was a child that was a victim of sexual assault, she would refer them even to our agency and also sign the certification because they do have that power. It gets tricky about who can sign within those agencies. That's an area, that we really want to educate more child protective workers and adult protective workers. So we should invite them to our events and network with them and collaborate with them because they do identify crimes and they do make investigations and they make findings and recommendations to the court. And so they play an important role here, and Congress identified them as certifiers. And so we should utilize them as well. Evelise, you shared that you guys have a unit here that takes care. So within the sheriff's office, you have a unit for the child cases, or you work closely with CPS or Child Protective. If you want to share, go ahead or type.
We have the unit, we have 4 officers that they dedicate completely to review the cases, and when they finish investigation, they will submit it to the sheriff to sign. But we discuss the cases. If I have question or I have a case that I want them to look into, I can go to their office and they will take care of it. They're really good.
Yeah, that's great to have that relationship.
And I would like just to add regarding the relationships. Again, I know that I'm focused on that collaboration, but in our case, for example, we have a very good relationship with the EOC because they have been educating our survivors, about what are their rights and everything about discrimination, how to do a claim and so on. And during those conversations and that collaboration, we have talked about what happens if we need a certification from you. Unfortunately, it seems that they know and they would collaborate. So, so far we haven't had the opportunity to ask them. However, I know that probably they might be really able to sign it. And with the Department of Labor is the same. We have a very good relationship with them. And actually we met the Secretary of Labor in person in a round table, and I shared that with him, like how beneficial it is for the Department of Labor signing certifications. And yes, he agreed, of course, well, no, but still the collaboration with the Department of Labor might tell me that probably if we need that, they might be able to sign it.
Yeah, and as a federal agency, the Department of Labor and the EOC, they have policies. I'll share the links to you all in the follow-up email on how to do the requests for evidence. The EOC will see a lot, probably we don't see it a lot in our work, but we'll see it a lot in the labor exploitation type cases that maybe they don't come to our type of agencies, but they also have a wealth of evidence and investigation. And they are working to support survivors, especially those that have been exploited through the work for certifications. And so they are also an avenue for somebody that's exploited in the workplace. That's not necessarily go to law enforcement, but maybe EOC did an investigation, maybe, theft of wages, rapes in the work. Good partners there. And the federal agencies, also Homeland Security investigations, Custom and Border Patrol and FBI are also certifiers, and they might not be the first people we think about, but that they're also could be helpful in signing these certifications. And I imagine that if you get one of certifications signed by them, they probably are a good piece of evidence to show that the person is eligible. And then, Dr. Amin, you shared this about CPS and investigative. I am aware of that, and I think we're working with the coalition there in Texas about that. It gets confusing with state and county agencies, the welfare agencies. A lot of them are run at the state level, right? So the head of the agency is in the state level. A lot of the child protective agencies are run at the county level. And so it gets confusing. And I would say, I would always, if I was going to seek a certification, I would start with the caseworker, the person that is most aware of the helpfulness, and ask them if they know of a procedure. Maybe ask them if they can't sign, then to tell me who can, or who should I be directing that to. And so that, and if you want, and we can talk about that, if you want to talk more about that one, I mean, I can tell you about that and how New App has tried to help with that confusion after happily share with you that. But I want to take the last 6 minutes, and probably it's less than 6 minutes. Maybe now we're at 4 to do whatever you guys want and stop with the slides there.
Well, of course, take a picture.
And so, you know, we're talking about what we want to do next session is talk about a little more about your roles and how, you know, a little more about evidence collection, a little bit more about the strategies that have worked. We also want to invite somebody from clinic and Zakia and Norma to share your experience with BIA accreditation. Is there anything else on this subject that you would like to learn more about?
If you feel
Sorry, go ahead, Norma.
no, I was gonna say, if you feel comfortable to open your camera so I can take the picture.
So Rocio, I have a question. We see that only a few states have these U Visa laws, and of course, the ones that have it's easier for them to get certification or even argue or reach out to these agencies. How do the others actually advocate to have this legislation? Do you have any suggestions for us?
That's where I was talking about the toolkit. That's where I would look to see, and I would work with your coalitions because they usually have a policy person, you know, they help make, like, I know when I worked at the coalition, they helped make a human trafficking law. And Nora, do you guys have a policy person in your coalition?
Yeah, we do. And I'm definitely going to be up with them.
Yeah, so bring them up and let them know, you know, you all are members of probably these bigger organizations, and they all have, they have a policy person, and they want to hear what's important to you. And so sometimes even collecting the stories of when somebody was clear, you know, as advocates and working directly with survivors, we get to hear a lot of stories and opportunity to do advocacy, but we can say, like, there's this example of somebody who was really helpful, who was 100% eligible, but they didn't get certification because there's no policy, or because law enforcement just, you know, didn't want to, and they are left out. Collecting those kind of stories can be very compelling to maybe when you have legislature or somebody thinking about it. And I'll look at that toolkit a little more to see what strategies they say, but I say starting with your coalitions and the policy person, and letting them know that this is a goal for you.
Okay, if you are ready, I'm gonna take the picture. I'm gonna take 2 pictures because I have like 2 pages. So get close to your camera, big smile. I'm gonna count 1, 2, smile. Okay, I got 1. Hold on, because I need to paste it, otherwise I'm gonna lose this one. Hold on. Let me, oh my God. 1 second, because this is not opening. Okay, I got the second page. Are you ready? Big smile. I'm gonna count 1, 2, smile. Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for your questions. I hope this was an interesting time we spent together, that you learned some stuff. I learned from you. I would love to hear suggestions on the chat before you go of what you want to learn more about. We already have a date. It's
April
19th. It's going to be a little different, guys, because we're used to meeting on Tuesdays or Thursdays, and April 19th is a Wednesday. And so save that slot. And we hope to see you then. And
Thank you.
Thank you, the council and interpreters and everybody else that joined and spoke up.
See you next month. Bye.
Okay.